made available to us a group of pictures, and some of the best ones, are not the best, but some more easily identified. We made copies of, and they're here on the table. You get a good look. And Mickey brought a framed picture. It looked like that was made of Minnie back when she may have been a young lady.
Yeah.
And then also there, Mickey brought, Minnie had entrusted him with a pair of glasses that belonged to John Giles Granger. You're invited to inspect, to look at those. And then also, there is a trowel, Mason's trowel, that my dad told me that it belonged to John Giles Granger. So, depending on his accuracy of that was his, it is now in my possession. And then we have the shoe latch that we don't know for sure that it did. We don't know that it didn't belong to John Giles Granger. It's just been in the family longer than I can remember, and as longer than you can remember too. It was, when we grew up, it was a handy thing that was around the place. So it could very easily have belonged to him. That's what people use to make their shoes, or when your shoes fell apart, take rivets and brads and nail them back together. And so we appreciate John Harriman bringing those. But the piece that I just can't get over is a bracelet. We'll hear more about it in a few minutes. And then something else. That tag. Now, if you know what this is, don't say anything. But how many of you can raise your hand and say, I know what that is? Well, that's about half. Most of you hadn't lived long enough, and I had to put this in. It's very fragile. I was nosing around in an old house that belonged to a relative of the Grangers. And I found this in that house, and I was assuming that not long after that the house was demolished. But I either took it, salvaged it, borrowed it, or just plain stole it. But a relative of that family I had hoped would be here today, and I was going to pass it on to them, but they're not here, so I want to hang on to it a little longer. Oh, what is it? Back before refrigerators, and you want to keep your food cool that you fixed for dinner, and you're going to serve it again for supper, you had to keep it cool on hot days. So you'd put this on your front window, front door, or if you live down a long way from the highway, put it up on your mailbox. The ice truck would come by and see the ice tag. They'd come down to your house, and they would deliver however much you had up, whichever one you wanted. So this is an ice tag. And I expect this thing here is at least 100 years old. Let me show you my parking place here. And now I took advantage of y'all. This is just something that I have in my keepsake. It's a rather unusual thing. You sat at the church during summer revivals and watched the cattle bats fly through the carbide lights and get singed and burned and die down like a plane going down. What is so unusual, on the back of it, it says, Lewis Paint and Wallpaper, phone number 5187.
Most of the time it was a funeral home represented on the back of it.
But they had one now.
Yeah, they did.
This one is fancy. If you want to look at this, you're welcome to. I thought this is the most unusual thing that I found in my parents' stuff. How could you term it? This is a contract between my dad, J.H. Granger, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. It was a contract in which he agreed to clear a right-of-way for a transmission line to come across his property, specifying to clear an area 75 feet wide on the entire length of his property, cleared of all trees, brush, stumps, and dangerous trees that could be overhanging the 75 foot. They could cause problems to the power lines that were going to be built. He agreed to it and signed it, and I suppose he performed the work and collected all the money. $3.73.
All the work.
It's in there.
Do you have a date on that? Is there a date on it, the contract?
It's dated.
Want to look at it?
Yeah, check and see. Yeah, it's a legal contract, about 4 pages of it. But it's not written in today's political terminology. It's very simple.
May 6, 1936.
1936.
What she said.
May 6, 1936.
Can anybody, how many of you here can identify what this is? Let me open it up so you can see inside.
Stamp it.
Rationing stamps, rationing things.
What kind of stamps?
Rationing,
Rationing stamps issued in 1943. But
Here war, that put out here was World War II,
well,
or one.
2.
it was assigned to me, so it had to be World War II. I'm not I'm old, but not quite that old.
They had it for shoes, gasoline, sugar,
Coffee,
tire,
canned goods, meat,
There was a lot of things that you had to have a ration for.
and one of the books, it is quite well used. The others, there's not much use out of them. But I believe it's book number 4. See if that's not the one that's got a lot of stamps missing. These all 3 were made,
Yeah.
they're in my name.
And there's some gone out of this book, yeah.
The others have practically none on it.
And there's several gone out of this one, yeah.
Oh, that's, most of you have probably seen some of these, but you don't see them much anymore. An old Zippo lighter, just reminiscent of the days when I thought those things. Oh, yeah, I can forget that.
And nobody's misbehaving on it.
Anybody who needs to have the Board of Education apply to the seat of your comprehension? Somebody asked me, you what?
I don't know what I asked.
What it said it looked like something you, a whipping device or something. I said, quite likely you'll find when there's something from my blood.
Well, I'm glad you didn't find it when I was little.
And I knew where it was at though. But this belonged, I do not know that this ever belonged to John Charles Granger. They were my dad's. And I know when Oklahoma was you when the house burned. He was 4 years old, and the house burned, and a lot of people donated, gave things for them to get back in the house, raise them kids. I wasn't a part of it then. And so it could have very easily have been John Giles or John William Granger. In fact, that I have his dad's razor, but didn't choose to bring it. I didn't want to be charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Then, while I'm thinking about it, Carolyn, your dad was a barber.
Yes.
And one time when he was at our house, he and Dad were talking about razors, and he mentioned that Dad had, I think he said it was his daddy's. I remember seeing it. And Uncle Noah said, I'll take it home and I'll sharpen it. It never came back.
I've got a strap.
But do you have a razor that the handle looks like bone?
Yes.
Yeah, a yellow looking.
Was ridges?
Yes, I have that.
That's it.
Now, who did that belong to?
It belonged to my dad.
Okay.
But I was going to look at to have it sharpened and dropped and made right.
Then you may have misinformed about that. Daddy didn't want to use that on us for a spanking thing. He said he didn't want to get his strap dusty spanking us with it.
Al Marie would not agree with that. One night, Opal and Pat, middle sister, and Uncle Leland's daughter, Al Marie Taylor, she came to spend the night, and they made a paddock in the other room on the floor. And of course, like girls, they giggled when they talked. Daddy said, all right, girl, get quiet. Pick it up from there and take it from there.
He came in and spanked Al Marie.
Which is,
He thought he was spanking Patsy because she's always the one that was giggling.
Al Marie was in the middle. Opal and Pat was on the outside. So guess who got whooped? When Al Marie moved to the outside, Dad didn't know it. She went home and said, all right.
But we had fun.
I just want to know if it's still in y'all's possession. Now, the bracelet. Carolyn, you will tell us something about the bracelet.
How many of you were here last year? Well, you heard Lynn read this about the bracelet, and I will read a few facts here. Giles was stationed in the Army at Shiloh, and I got the map out and looked how far it was between Shiloh and Sandy. Let's see what. Well, I've forgotten the name. Dad used to talk about they lived at Sandy Hook.
Shandy.
Is it Shandy?
There's a little town close to Bottle Range.
Okay, and it was 50 miles. So, as a bird flies. So, I guess it was close enough that he could get home, walk home. And he would go back home to see his bride. She was expecting their first child, and he put out a crop, planted a crop on one of those trips home. Well, they were married in February of 1863. And our grandfather, John William, was born March the 13th, 1864. And on April the 29th, let's see, her name was Margaret Elizabeth, walked to Toon to visit the Kellers. They had been good friends of Giles. In fact, they just kind of his parents, weren't they?
Yeah, he came to North Carolina.
With them, and they met. He came from Shiloh, and she came from Shandy.
Well, he was in camp down in Hatchet River.
Oh,
for
okay.
rest.
Okay, that he wasn't in Shiloh.
He was in Shiloh.
Oh, they were on R&R.
Right.
That's where I want to go, far. But they met at the Keller house, and Giles had this bracelet. Or you want to pass it around? We don't know where he got it. I imagine he wanted shooting craps, to be honest, because I understand that was about the only entertainment that they had was shooting craps. And when I was 9 or 10, Grandpa Granger came to our house in Whiteville, Tennessee. We lived on the farm, and he brought that bracelet for me. Why he chose me, I do not know. But we've taken care of it, we've prized it. And the brides in the family, Tim's 2 daughters, wore it, and I wore it for our weddings. And I'm gonna give it to my daughter. She's the one that will see the brides get this. A few years ago, I had it appraised, and the fellow told me it was 18 karat gold. It's really, really good gold. He said they would take just a piece of flat, rolled out gold and cut them out. And then if he told me how they've been, and I don't understand, don't remember. But he says it's Victorian, it fits the period, and I didn't ask the cost. It's priceless, it don't matter what that is. But the discoloration on the front of it, when Kari, my dad's mother, was dying of typhoid fever, wasn't it? Typhoid fever killed her.
Somebody said they thought it was appendicitis, ruptured appendix.
Okay, I never heard that. But anyway, it was in a box under her bed, and someone put a lemon in that box, and the lemon rotted next to it. But that's part of its history. I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't take that out for the world. But the design on it is handmade. And of course, I keep it in my bank in a deposit box because I'm so afraid something might happen to it.
How many things just a old country boy, Confederate soldier, veteran, here, right it down. 200 years later, we could hold in our hands
But you know, I didn't finish the story really. Giles had to go back to camp that night, left about midnight, and Margaret Elizabeth stayed at the Kellers. And the next morning, they heard the baby crying and crying and crying. And they went in to see about her, and she had died.
I'll go ahead and finish this a little
Yeah.
bit. You get so many different stories, and in my research, I come up with a lot of different stories with a lot of connections in specific areas. And in this particular story, I've got 3, at least, different versions. One was that Margaret Elizabeth walked and carried the 6 weeks old child 6 miles to Mr. Keller. He's also referred to as Dr. Keller in other places. Another story was that she walked and carried the baby in a cold rain for the 6 miles. Another, that she walked and her brother, which implied a younger brother, walked and helped her carry the baby. Now, in the 1850 census, it showed she had a younger brother. At that time, she was 5 years old. In the 1860 census, she was 15, but there was no younger brother in the census. And if he was deceased or gone, what happened to him in the 1860 census? This happened 1863 or 64. See, well, there's loops that have to be filled. So, in the book, that's what I wrote. I tried to take the best, most logical, most reasonable, and build on that. So, whether it was a beautiful sunny day, she walked by herself, still walking 6 miles, carrying a baby and all the necessities. Today, you couldn't even put the necessities in a truck, much less carry them on your back. The baby can walk 6 miles. So, anyway,
Let me report to something about hospital. Hospital is pneumonia with what?
yes, that's what she died from pneumonia. But if she walked in the rain, there was the death cause of death was pneumonia. But hey, we don't even know where she's buried.
That's the head.
We don't have a death certificate. There's nothing. In fact, I had to chase a lot of rabbits to come up with the name Margaret Elizabeth. And that this is in 3 different last names. P-Y-L-E-S, P-I-L-E-S, P-O-L-E-S. Anyway, now, Mickey, I asked, and last year, brought the class, showed it to us, and when I saw him, I said, Mickey, for next year's program, would you talk to us about Minnie Granger? Since John and Charles, or left him, I guess Uncle Dan left him to Minnie. So now, how they got into her possession, she entrusted Mickey with them, and he's kept them, and he brought them last year, got to show them. But today, last year, I asked Mickey if he would tell us the Minnie Granger story.
I know that some of you, I'm sure, know me. Some of you may not, but I'm Mickey Granger. My grandfather was Dan, and grandmother was Ruthie. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about Aunt Minnie. You know, as being in the funeral business, I hear lots of funeral sermons. And some of them are pretty much the same. They just change the names occasionally. But one that you all may have heard ministers do is one about the birth date on the stone and the dash and then the death date. You all have heard that story. And the minister would talk about the dash. What happened between. So I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I know, and some of you probably going to know some things too. But I'm going to share with you some of those things that happened in that dash. My Aunt Minnie was born in Hardeman County, Tennessee, on April the 30th in 1905, and she was the daughter of Daniel Solomon Granger and Ruth Savage Granger, and she died on July the 22nd, 1997. She moved to Bemis as a young lady and began working in the Bemis cotton mill alongside her father, Dan, and worked there until she took early retirement. Now, a lot of people may think that she worked until she could retire, but she took early retirement, and I'll get into that a little bit later when she took on a second career. Briefly, I just want to speak about that dash and the many things that, as I said, I know, some that you may know. Some are going to be interesting, some amusing, probably some of them unbelievable. And I'm sure that some of you could tell me a few things that I don't know, so we'll just leave it at that. When she came to Memphis, they lived on Tennessee Street. You remember the address? 228. 228 Tennessee Street. She lived there with her parents and also with my dad. And during the time that they lived on Tennessee Street, not only were those the ones that lived there. There were a lot of other people that lived and boarded there from time to time. Two right here. I know, John Lynn, you were there when you were going to school at Union, is that right? And Opal was there. Aunt Myrtle, who was my aunt and Aunt Minnie's sister, she also was there after the death of her husband, after a few years after his death. I don't know just exactly how many years there was in that last, but she eventually moved in the house. So there was always somebody living there on Tennessee Street with Aunt Minnie and my grandfather and my grandmother. And how many of you know what Aunt Minnie's middle name was, or what I'll tell you, it was an E. How many knew what the E stood for? Ella. Minnie Ella. But most people, you know, just knew her as Miss Minnie or Aunt Minnie. And she may have been Miss Minnie, but she didn't miss much, I'm going to tell you. Does anybody, do the names Timms or Feitner ring a bell? We all thought of Aunt Minnie as just being Aunt Minnie and Miss Minnie, but she was married and divorced twice. Now that was something that she was not necessarily proud of, so she was had a very strong Christian convictions, and I really don't know about the divorces, other than that she told me about the second one a little bit, and I asked her why she and Claude Feitner was his name, were divorced, and she told me that she just could not be happy attending the Catholic Church with him. She wouldn't be very happy with me now. So, but anyway, we had a good relationship, and my mother lived just one house. There was one house between Aunt Minnie and my grandparents. And that's where my mother and my father met after they all came to Bemis to seek employment at the Bemis Cotton Mill. And as most of you know, a lot of you have roots with the Bemis Cotton Mill, which was organized in 1900. And I've heard my mother, we were talking about the divorces and Aunt Minnie, and I've heard my mother tell about a trip that she and Aunt Minnie took. And that was before, I'm quite certain, it was before my mother and Dad were married. And they went to San Francisco on the train. Now that was a long train trip. All I know is they went to San Francisco. Aunt Minnie talked about going, but she never told me anything about it. But I asked my mother, I said, why did you and Aunt Minnie go to San Francisco? She said, your Aunt Minnie was chasing a man. So I said, okay. So that's all I know about that trip. And I mentioned them going on the train, and I have to tell you that my first train trip was with Aunt Minnie. She took me. Yeah, we rode the train from Jackson, Tennessee to North Mississippi. Now, how long is that going to take you on a train? But I do remember I was having to catch the train early one morning. And on the way between Jackson, Tennessee, and I don't know exactly where in Mississippi, but it was just maybe Corinth, Tupelo, one of those northern Mississippi towns, that we ate breakfast on the train. And oh, was that a memory for me. Now, Aunt Minnie and my grandfather, Grandpa Granger, as I always called him, worked the second shift at the mill. And they would walk to work. They went in at 6 a.m. is when they clocked in, 6 a.m. in the morning, and then they would get off at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, they walked to the mill, walked home every day, simply because they didn't have other transportation. And, of course, the mill, a lot of the people that lived in Bemis walked to work because it was just pretty much convenient for anybody. Now then, let me ask you a question, and some of you may know something about it, and some of you may not, and this is going to be interesting to a lot of you. Does the term Mother Goose mean anything to anybody other than a nursery rhyme? Well, I'm going to tell you a little something about a second occupation that Aunt Minnie had for a short period of time. and this was mentioned just a few minutes ago with some of the memorabilia that you were talking about. She was recruited by the FBI to do work, and it was during World War II, during the black market. And we were talking about the rationing stamps. There was a lot of black market going on during World War II. Now, I don't know how she was recruited, but she was definitely recruited she would come home from work at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and she would change her clothes, and she would go out. And she was used as an undercover decoy to find out about people that were operating some things on the black market. And that was her name, Mother Goose. Now then, her partner's name, that I remember very well, was Aunt Lucy. That was his undercover name, Aunt Lucy, and she was Mother Goose. Now, she was recruited to accompany him to go. I don't know where they went. I don't know whether they went to bars or wherever, but they were there just to gather information about people who were working the black market. And I know this to be true because Aunt Minnie showed me a letter of condemnation from J. Edgar Hoover. So she received a letter from J. Edgar Hoover. Where that letter has gone or anything, I don't know. But I saw the letter, and as I said, I don't think it was it wasn't a job that lasted 3 years or anything like that, but she did this for a short period of our life. I didn't know about it until I was old enough to understand, and Aunt Minnie shared this information with me. And she got to be very close friends with her partner, Aunt Lucy. And this individual, I never met him, but he has called me on the phone when I was a younger boy and talked to me many times. And I remember one time receiving a telephone call, and he told me who it was. He said, "I saw you yesterday." And I thought, "Where?" He said, "You were in Woolworth store in Jackson, Tennessee, and you was at the candy counter there buying some candy or something there." He said, "Now, was you not?" I said, "Yeah." I was alone. I had ridden the Bemis bus over there and was there in Woolworth. Now, so a lot of these things that I'm telling you, I know firsthand, although I never met Aunt Lucy, but I did see the letter that she did receive from J. Edgar Hoover. Now, as most of you know, Aunt Minnie was a very benevolent person. She helped raise a lot of children in the Bemis area, and all of them referred to her as Aunt Minnie. And one of my fondest memories, I guess, was as a child, was the fair week we had. We always went to the fair when they would turn out school, and we'd pretend to pick cotton for a little while to make us a little money to ride the rides and the side shows and things like that. And me, along with my sister and Alice Mitchell and some of the other cousins, we would all get together and we went to the fair together. Now, we didn't have a lot of money to spend, as you probably know, but we wanted to spend that money on rides and things like that. But Aunt Minnie, although no transportation now, no car or anything like that, would get a taxi or get on the Bemis bus, and she would come to the fairgrounds about 5 or 6 o'clock, wagging a big old basket or something, and she would bring our eats to us. And we would all meet under the Griffin tent, as some of you remember, and years later I was part of the Griffin Funeral Home here in Jackson. And we would meet there, and she would bring us fried chicken and deviled eggs and sandwiches and cake, and we were the hit at the fair, Other people were sort of jealous of us, so we would eat and didn't have to spend our money on the fair food. But she always brought a little extra money too, because she knew we'd be running low by that time. And she always, she was not a rich person. She never had a lot of money, And one of the reasons was, and I think that John Lennon and Opal certainly will agree with me, she gave away everything she had, just about. She would give it to you. If she thought you needed it, she would give it to you. And she has always been a very benevolent person in that respect. I might mention also that, we mentioned she came to the fair on the bus or the taxi, and that, as I mentioned, no transportation, no cars. She didn't drive. Now, I did hear one story, and I'm assuming this is true. I don't know, but I'm assuming it's true because I've heard it more than one time. About many years in her younger years, someone owned an A model, a T model, or one of the old model car, and so Aunt Minnie was going to drive to Bethel Springs. Am I right on that? Was it Bethel Springs?
She didn't drive.
What
I heard a story about everyone to Henderson,
took them a half a day to get there?
2 hours.
Oh, well, anyway, yeah, we've heard that story. Was she there? Was she trying to drive?
My understanding was she did.
Oh, well, anyway, that's the reason it took them forever. But that's one of the stories that we've all have heard. And now I do know this. I know that after my grandparents died, and Aunt Minnie and Aunt Myrtle were still living at 228 there, Tennessee Street, and I had probably just gotten my license. I was probably 16, maybe 17. But I was going to teach Aunt Minnie to drive. Well, the driving lesson was going to be from 228 Tennessee Street to 37 North Street. Not very far, just a block and a half maybe. We never made it, and I never tried it again. So Aunt Minnie always depended on her transportation for somebody else. And believe you me, she didn't mind asking you. She didn't. If she knew you was going in that direction that she wanted to go in, she did not hesitate to call you and say, "Oh, I need a way to go." And she always depended on someone else. And now, one of the negatives about her doing that was that she was never on time. She would schedule you to come by and pick her up. And as I mentioned earlier, that she was a very dedicated in church attendance, in her tithes and in her attendance. But you always had to wait for her when you got there to pick her up for church. My dad would get so aggravated that he would just, when she got in the car, he'd say, "I don't even need to go to church. I don't even need to go. I'm so aggravated. Minnie, can't you be ready? Can't you, when you say that you're going to be ready, can't you be ready?" And I mentioned that she was faithful in attending church and her tithes, and she didn't mind asking for change when the collection plate went by either. She was notorious for doing that. If she felt like that she could only give $2 and she had a 10, she's going to get 8 before that collection plate got by. So she did not mind asking for change. But she was always there at church for her family and friends, and always in her prayers. After taking her early retirement, as I mentioned earlier, Aunt Minnie began working as a caregiver. And she would take care of people in her home, or she would go to their home. And I've known her to stay with individuals for months until they did not need her and until they died. But she was a very good caregiver. She was the people that she waited on thought a lot of her, did a lot for her, and she thoroughly enjoyed being a caregiver and taking care of people. She took on the responsibility of the guardianship for a mentally challenged individual. And she remained true to him until her life failed. And at that time, I took over. It was Clellan Sisson who lived across the street at 228 Tennessee Street. And he loved her as if she was her mother. She had taken care of him and his mother before her death. And Aunt Minnie was a good person, loved her, but there were a few things that could annoy you about her sometime. And again, going back to the transportation deal, she was a very, very good backseat driver. And she didn't mind telling you how to drive, and if she was riding with you, I don't care how fast you were always going too fast. And she always had a swimmy head, you know, and that was her excuse for you to slow down. Now, I've got a swimmy head today, so you all slow down. And so she also was deathly afraid of storms. Now, the story that I get about my father also was very scared of storms. The story I get, and I don't know how true this is, but I assume it's that they, as young children, and I think it was when Aubrey was with them too, that their house was destroyed by a tornado or a storm. They had severe damage or something of that nature. And after that, they were always afraid of storms. And if there was a stormy day or night anywhere around her, she was going to find somewhere else to be. Or, I mean, with somebody. She was either going to go to our house or she was going to call somebody and say, you got to come in. But she was going to, and preferably at our house, because she loved the storm house. Now, she really liked the storm house. That was her best friend. And I can remember, as a young boy, she had come to the house because it was stormy. And she's got to go to the storm house. She says, we got to go. And so we go, and I'm already down the steps. And Aunt Minnie is going to come down, and she falls all the way down the steps, splits her head wide open, needing attention. Would not leave that storm house. Would not leave to go get stitches until after that storm was over. And then we were able to go and find Dr. Kelly Smith, and he sewed her head up and took care of her. There's a lot of other things that I could say about this wonderful woman. She had a knack for bartering, and she could pretty much talk you out of anything, you know. And let me give you an example. When she lived in the last house she lived in on C Street, she'd had some work done on her windows. And she decided that the man that did the work just didn't do as good a job as he probably should have. So I think maybe she even called him back the second time, and she still wasn't happy. So she convinced my cousin, Jimmy Mitchell, he was the business manager at Lambeth College, and he could get this done and get it done right, however she wanted it done. So Jimmy proceeds to call the gentleman that had done the work to ask him about coming back again. And he told Jimmy, he said, sir, he said, I've done more work for 2 quarts of green beans and a quart of pickle than anybody I ever worked for in my life. And he said, I don't think I'm going to go back. But that's how she bargained or bartered for that job that he had done on the windows, was stuff that she had canned. But she spent her entire life doing things for other people, loved her family and friends, was a true Christian in every respect. I might mention, as we had talked earlier, you know, that some of the things that she did, she loved her snuff. And, you know, it's okay putting, I guess, a little snuff in your mouth, but now, Aunt Minnie, she could put a lot of snuff in her mouth. I mean, a lot of snuff. And I know I've heard my mother say when Aunt Minnie would be a stormy night or something, and she would come down there, and she never wanted to go to bed if it was stormy. Now, it was all right if she went to sleep on the sofa, but you don't go to bed if it's stormy. And Mother would tell me about, she said, you know, she said, Minnie was down here, and she got her a pillow and put it on the sofa, and she was laying there and went to sleep, and she said, just messed up my pillow slip. She said, there's snuff all over. So she'd go to sleep with that snuff in her mouth. But I guess that's just one of the good memories that we have. And Christmas was very special to her. She always, when they lived there at 228 on Tennessee Street. Christmas Eve night was a big night for all of us. We met there with Johnny and Mary Ruth and Aunt Myrtle and all of their children and us and my grandmother. My mother's mother was always included. We always met at their house on Christmas Eve, and we would have the big opening of presents and have a big time, and the kids would be waiting on Santa Claus. She also would prepare, she loved to prepare the Christmas lunch, and we'd all go back a lot of times on Christmas Day, and Aunt Minnie had the most wonderful recipe for fruit cake. It was not like any fruit cake that any of you all have ever eaten. Now, she wouldn't eat somebody else's fruit cake for fear that it had some wine or a little something, soaked in it. Now, that she wasn't going to trust that. But her fruit cake was not like that. It was entirely different. I have the recipe for it today. I've never tried it, but I'm going to try it one of these days. But everybody, it's just called the Granger fruit cake, and it's not like any fruit cake that you all have ever eaten. But it's good. But this was special time for her, and then in later years, when all of this had ceased, she decided that we would do breakfast. And that would be anywhere from a week to right up to Christmas Eve morning. Depending on when everybody could come, because if one person said they was invited, couldn't come, well, let me change the date to accommodate you, because I want everybody here. And she would tell us all, now you be here. You be here we're going to have breakfast at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Well, you can forget that. If we ate by 11, we were doing good. She always had somebody there to help her always it was country ham and gravy and biscuits and all the trimmings and everything. But we usually had to wait. And some of you all probably have been there, Opal, and you know that have had to wait, but it eventually happened, and we remember those good times. I noticed on the internet just recently, someone that I don't even know or ever heard of placed a comment concerning her burial plot, saying they'd posted a saying, and it was just in the last year or two, and this person signed her name, and I have no clue who this person was. But to the effect, she said something about, this person I will never forget. I loved her much. And it was some girl that had written this on the, and I don't know whether it was a relative, I don't know whether it was just a friend, but somebody that knew her. We all loved her, never forget her, with her quirkiness, and as one of her great nephews said, carrying her body into the church for the funeral. He told the other pallbearers, you all slow down, because Aunt Minnie's got a swimmy head. That's the true story. And if you've ever been to her grave in New Union Cemetery in Hardeman County, you will notice her inscription. That I had put on it. She was Aunt Minnie to all who knew her.
But every time she saw a car coming to meet her, or she saw a car coming up behind her, she pulled off the road and parked until it got out and out of sight.
I knew there was some. I'd heard the story, and I knew it was true.
I have seen that car.
Have you?
She brought it down home one time and parked it in our barn, which had a hallway. And one of the horses kicked it and dented it in the side. She left it there so she got ready to come back to Beamer's.
Another about her car was that your dad wanted to borrow it one time to go on a date. So he begged and harped on Minnie, let me have the car so I can have a date. No. Please, Minnie, let me have the car. He kept begging. Finally, she said, all right. So, and a little bit later he said, Minnie, I need some money. What do you need money for? Well, I got to put some gas in the car. I'm not gonna give you any money to put gas in the car. Well, then I'll just drive it like it is. Lord God, no, don't do that. You'll ruin it.
Minnie came to our house one summer, and she liked to talk about her fishing. And she was kind of maybe bragging a little bit about her fishing, and she asked, is there any place around here that maybe we could go fishing? And so they said she wanted to have a fish fry. So there was a creek not far along, and so we all got together and dug some worms and got our fishing pole and headed to the creek. And in no time at all, they'd caught several perch and 2 or 3 nice catfish, and they had a lot of fun. So, of course, what do you do the next day? You go back fishing. And so they went back fishing, and that day, for some reason, they weren't catching any fish. And they thought, why weren't they catching any fish like they were the day before? So after little success, they'd only caught 2 or 3 little fish. So she said, I've got a trick. And so, as you alluded to, she liked to chew. So she got her a brand new worm and put on the hook and gave it a great big spit. And she said, okay, fish, come and get this. Well, they didn't catch anything, and so she just said, maybe fish don't like snuff.
We have a story here that's shared by a relative also who wishes to remain anonymous. We were living in an old log house where my ancestors had lived for many years when Minnie Granger came for a visit. She would often come and spend a few days with us. This was an occasion we always enjoyed because when Minnie was around, there was always a lot of laughter at the funny stories being shared. This was before electricity came into our neighborhood, and except on a really bright and sunny summer day, the house was pretty dark. It must have been either a very dark winter day or maybe while it was still dark outside when this story happened. There was one kerosene lamp on the table in the dining room and no light at all in the kitchen. The food had been cooked and we were waiting for the biscuits to get done so we could eat. After a few minutes had passed, someone declared that the biscuits should be done by now. Since Minnie was the one standing closest to the cook stove, she went to fetch them. Minnie, who was accustomed to having good electric lights, turned and headed toward the stove in the dark kitchen. In a loud voice, she declared, "Look out, biscuits, here I come." We all enjoyed a good laugh at her expense, as well as some good hot homemade biscuits.
I think most of us could write a book and sit around any length of time. I lived with her from January of 1944 to July the 22nd of 1944. That's when I went and got married. But she was good to help everybody. She would do anything. In fact, she carried me to the doctor once because she thought I needed to go, and I didn't think I needed to go. But she made me go to the doctor, and the doctor was Henry Herring, and she called him, "Henry, now I want you to take care of this kid." So he did. He gave me a prescription of something, and I got better. And I was really glad. Aunt Minnie had carried me after it was all over and said and done. But there's a couple that used to come to our church as they were missionaries. I've got a book about his life. And they would stay at Minnie's house. If they didn't get to stay at Minnie's house, she was very disappointed. And I've got a picture of them with Robert and me on our golden anniversary in 1994, when we had our 50th anniversary. They drove from Middle Tennessee to be with us on our golden anniversary. But his nephew has written this book.
I tell a tale on my wife. Oprah was telling us about having the book and asked if I'd like to read it about the midgets who were missionaries to India. And I said, well, I knew the midgets, so I said, yes. My wife said later to me, there were midgets who were missionaries to India. she didn't get the connection that there was a people's name. She was expecting the little people. Another story about Minnie, and Mickey mentioned the couple across the street with the boy that Minnie sort of took care of. I guess it's his uncle, wasn't it, Saul?
Saul was his uncle, yeah.
One day Saul was over at the Granger house, and I think Minnie had just baked a cake or something. I think she gave him a bowl of icing to lick or scrape out, and he had something was scraping it. And you know how used to at the chalkboard, how it sounded when you would drag a fingernail down a chalkboard? Well, he was scraping that bowl, and it sort of got on Minnie's nerves, like that fingernail on the chalkboard. And she turned around and said, "Saul, stop that." And he said, "Does that scrape your skin, Miss Minnie?" So, is anybody else? I didn't intend to just throw it open. Anybody have story, remembrance of Minnie that you'd like to share? We would love to hear any that you have to tell.
Hey, Mother, tell them about that time you was taking that man to the doctor. She kept leaning over looking at the speed on it.
Oh, yeah, I carried her to the doctor a lot of times, carried her to church every Sunday. If I got to going too fast, she'd say, "Don't forget my sweaty hand." Slow down, she'd say.
That ain't all she said, though.
I don't remember that one, Bobby, you'll have to tell me.
Said she kept looking over, she was looking at your speedometer, said, "Now, if you're driving that fast with me, you can slow down." She said, "I'm gonna get there late and have to come back and say, oh, don't you look that
They said, "Hey, Minnie, how you doing today?" I never felt better than that last.
What about the kids in Bemis?
She spoiled them all.
Anybody have any remembrances?
I want to say something. You mentioned earlier that I remembered Minnie, and at the time I couldn't remember Minnie because I was real small at the time, but there's been different things that's been said here that is brought back to memory. The mention of Myrtle, and then the mention of the snuff. Well, I remember different occasions that Wayne and Verlene, I was with them, and we went to a house, and I remember the name Myrtle. I remember Minnie. But then I also remember an occasion at Arbor's house where we lived down the street, and I'd go up and visit Arbor, which we called Papa. And I remember there was a time we went in the house, and there was a round can of something on the table. And I picked it up, and Urshel, my grandmother, picked it up real quick and said, "You don't need that." Evidently, Minnie had been by, and she left her snuff can on the table, and I found it. And so I'm putting two and two together as you're mentioning different things here, and so evidently Myrtle was the half-sister of Minnie, and I didn't realize until just now that that's who we were visiting, was Minnie and Myrtle. And for some reason, I was thinking that Myrtle was related to Verlene, and not knowing that Myrtle was a half-sister of Minnie. So it's coming back together now as I'm remembering putting two and two together on different things, but I remembered about the snuff can over at Arbor's, about them getting that up out of my hand, and thinking, well, Minnie must have been by and left her snuff can there. So I wanted to share that with you.
Having lived with Minnie all those years, I got a lot of the stories. One of them that you mentioned was that men that she was married to and divorced. I also heard that she came close to marrying a third time. She was seeing this fella, and somebody observed that must be getting real serious. Minnie's letting him carry her snuff box. Now, if some of you don't have any idea what a snuff box is, I wish I had been successful. I spent all day Thursday and Friday looking. I've got a nickel snuff box that belonged to my dad that he wore in this front pocket on his bib overalls. He would buy a 10-cent can and leave it at the house, but he would put some in that little nickel tin box and put it in his overalls and go to the field to work. But now if he had to do some real precise plowing, like in the garden, that the horses had to walk just exactly right, not step on the plants, wouldn't dare start plowing in the garden until he got a dip of snuff. Because he said until he got that snuff, the horses just wouldn't walk right.
Speaking of those, my sister has one of these mini snuff boxes.
But
One of those nickel snuff boxes.
this one is about as big around as a quarter.
Yeah.
Now, and the 10-cent one was about as big as a silver dollar.
She has one of those mini snuff boxes.
But I couldn't find it. I've got it there somewhere. I've seen it not too long ago. I was doing something with some of his military stuff, and I couldn't find any of it. So I just didn't look at the right places. That's why I found all this other stuff that I thought might be of interest to you.
They had snuff glasses that had about 8 ounces of snuff in it, but they'd fill up their little bottle, little snuff boxes out of the glass.
Tell us about that, Kathy. She knows about that.
Oh, I'll tell you my story. Lynn and I were dating, and we spent a lot of Saturdays helping go down on the farm, help cut wood or carry it up to the barn or whatever, you know. And so one Saturday, we promised to go help Minnie trim her fruit trees in her backyard. Well, we were going to trim the trees, in fact, and she was going to fix us dinner. So we went and we worked all morning on those trees, and she finally came out and said, I got dinner ready, come on in. So we went in and ate, and we got finished. She said, here, I'll take and do the dishes. But she said, here, and my nickname was Kitten. She said, here, Kitten. She said, you go fill my snuff box. And I, what? I was born and raised up north. I wasn't familiar with snuff. I was familiar with the chewing tobacco, but not snuff. And so she said, go fill my snuff box. So I got him aside. I said, well, what is it and what do I do? So he gives me a spoon and he opens this little thing and he says, you put it in here. And I said, but that's just powder. He said, put it in there. So I started spooning it out, and of course smoke started raising, and I thought, oh gosh. I said, what's she gonna do with this? He said, she puts it on her lip down here. And I said, huh? So that was my introduction to snuff. You want me to read this now, or? Just give you this.
When you talked about how much snuff Minnie you would use, Daddy would take that box that he had, take the lid off, and sprinkle just a little bit, maybe less than a quarter of a teaspoon in that lid, and put it in his lower lip. Minnie would take a teaspoon. In fact, sometimes I think she used a tablespoon, and would pretty well round it up. Guess where she put it? In her lip? Under her tongue? In her ear? Pulled the cheek out and filled it full.
And you know, she quit about 3 years before she died.
Did she really?
Completely.
Cold turkey. Wow.
Daddy quit. And Mom did too, several years before they passed away.
Talking about quitting, let me tell this, she went up to the hospital to visit her cousin, York Rapids brother, was in the hospital. And when she got up there, well, he was just in pretty bad shape, I think, at the time. And she said, have you ever thought about quitting smoking? Clarence, I think, is that his name? He said, no, but have you ever thought about quitting dipping snuff? Well, no, I hadn't thought much about it.
This is from her funeral?
No, it was written before her.
Written before her funeral, okay. Okay. Aunt Minnie Memories, and this is written by Jenny Mitchell, July 24th, 2005. Aunt Minnie was unique, always busy doing good, giving of herself, helping where she could. Complex and spiritual, God gave her length of years. She loved to laugh and joke, but was not afraid of tears. She always remembered family and checked on us by phone. She liked to call at dinner time because she lived alone. She'd plant a little garden plot, make pickles, can some peas, stuff the vents with pantyhose, and roll her stockings at the knees. Memories of Aunt Minnie? Of course, more than a few. Especially Christmas breakfast, country ham, and biscuits too. Homemade jams and jelly, tiny glasses of OJ, scrambled eggs aplenty for a happy holiday. Big hugs and snuffy kisses, we will remember these. Until we see her again in heaven, we'll treasure Aunt Minnie memories.
She had breakfast a lot of times around spring, Easter, and I have helped her with one of those. She really would put on a spread. She put card tables in the living room, the bedroom, anywhere she could see people, she'd fix breakfast for them. And it wouldn't be just a family, a lot of times it would be sick, she just knew.
In the book about John Josh Granger, there's a picture of a reunion. It happened in 1951. The picture in the book was made in the front yard at 228 Tennessee Street. I've tried to count it. It looks like there's somewhere around 75 people there for that Granger reunion celebration. And something Mickey didn't mention about the house and all of the boarders that have lived there. It was only a 4-room house. Figure that. But the advantage or disadvantage, I guess it depends on your situation. The outhouse was about 50 feet out behind the main residence. So they didn't have to take up room in the house for that old bathroom. So, anybody else got something to share about Minnie?
When Brenda stayed with her son, she stayed with her, Brenda did, she had Sonny one weekend, and what did she tell you about?
We get a month, I think it was, wasn't it? We had a time, I tell you. When he first come and first gonna stay, when I was working, I didn't stay at night. So Aunt Minnie tells him, now Sonny, if you come in there one morning and you can't wake me up, you go across the street and get Maribel. He knew who they were. And she had a key to Aunt Minnie's house. So next morning, before Aunt Minnie got up, before I even got there, Sonny gets up, and he goes in there and he shakes Aunt Minnie and he says, Minnie, you dead?
I went with her one time to Memphis to a Peabody Hotel. They were having a thing for everybody that was a caretaker in West Tennessee. They were going to give us prizes and everything away. Well, Minnie didn't win a prize, but I went with her and she enjoyed the day. They served us a meal and they had all the speakers there for the health department, and people from Western State went, and so she had a big day that day. She got to go to the Peabody and watch the ducks walk in.
Before we bring our get together to a conclusion. I want to pose a question to those of you who are here and will express yourself. We have been meeting for some time in October, and our attendance has dwindled and gotten less and less. And I wondered if our format should be changed, or maybe the date, would September be a better month? I think I've asked before, but haven't received much of a response except, well, whatever you think. So I would like to know what some of you think, if September would be a better month with less conflicts than our October. Anybody else got anything to say? Again, thanks a bunch to all of you for coming. Mickey, thank you for your presentation. It was a delight. And it just proves not everybody can have an 8 mini. You're a
As I said at the end, everybody knew it.
you're a blessed man.
Everybody called her 8 mini.
Okay. Thank you.